A few people asked me to do a video on Gnosticism, so I thought it would be a good idea to take up the chance of doing a collab with my Irish right-hand man Stefan from Uberboyo. So today I will be explaining Gnosticism through the modern neoliberal consumerism which has pervaded our lifestyle, and how this links in with the demiurge of Gnosticism, who in the modern sense wants to fundamentally commodify the human soul through materialism and imprison you within the world of matter, and how Gnosticism offers a way out from this through gnosis, experience and knowledge. So what is the demiurge in Gnosticism? It is basically, well, Yaldabaoth, the lord of the world, the personification of matter and a monad of the material sphere, and that through him he gave birth to the other 7 planetary spheres, which are called the archons or governors. Yaldabaoth, being Saturn, represents the outer boundary of the solar system from what was astrologically known at the time, and that all the other planets within were conceived as having an ascending order of power. And this is why Cronus, for example, being the powerful god, the one who devours his own sons, is symbolic as the god of Saturn, and also Satan is associated with Saturn. It is because it is the morning star, the shining one, the one which pervades and is of the first light. Like Lucifer, Yaldabaoth and his 6 sons were rebels and want to establish a kingdom against God. The reason why you have this god is, in the first place, is because it is the son of the goddess Sophia, who resembles regenerative wisdom. Manly P. Hall, one of the greatest esoteric scholars, wrote in his book Gnosticism, the Key to Esoteric Christianity, Sophia Achamoff, the generative wisdom of the world, was lured into the abyss by beholding her reflection in the deep. Through union with the darkness, she gave birth to a son, Yaldabaoth, the child of chaos and the egg. Sophia Achamoff, being herself a spiritual nature, suffered horribly for her contact with matter, and after an extraordinary struggle she escaped out of the muddy chaos which had threatened to swallow her up." End quote. The Gnostic text is very mythological, which attracts me to it because it means it is very psychological and extendable when it comes to meaning through story. So that paragraph I just read is comparatively symbolic to the myth of Narcissus, because through Sophia's reflection, which she is lured into, she is, in a fashion of subjectivism, produces what you could call a psychological narcissistic complex in relation not only to her reflection, but to that which the ego uses to feed its narcissistic identity, which would be matter and the material. And this is one way I see the demiurge, similar to the worship of the god Mammon or Mammon. This is where we get the neoliberal consumerism or consumer culture link, because what are companies and people like Jeff Bezos and Amazon doing? They are enacting the structure of the demiurge to imprison man through matter and the material world. These consumerist corporations want individuals to fulfill the desires that the psychological complex of self-centered material interest craves, which in fulfillment serves the narcissistic identity. Thus, the best way to materialize and commodify the human soul is by developing a consumer culture where you are imprisoned within matter and the material world. In my view, this is the economic equivalent of the Gnostic demiurge, especially when you realize that it is the global corporations which want to destroy any other kind of unique, independent and culturally rich competitor which is much smaller than them. But what Gnostics wanted is still relevant to today, and that is what is called gnosis, meaning knowledge based on experience. To attain spiritual divine knowledge which is beyond and outside the imprisoned material body. Religious salvation for the Gnostics becomes one of spiritual gnosis and experience, not confession of one's sins to the Christian priest, for example. For the Gnostics, Soter Christos is the high priest, and this deprivation of him, or of this spiritual manifestation of Gnosis, is what people want and don't have, or are looking for, that is beyond the material, and that which brings meaning to such a life. This video, for example, is an extension of personal Gnosis, some kind of spiritual knowledge, and that is how I, at the moment, personally conceive God. That roughly, God is Gnosis, which is that which expands the personal conscious life through realization and manifestation, and that the more Gnosis that you acquire through whatever means of experience, the more your awareness of consciousness expands to further understand what you could call a higher conception of some transcendent divinity, let's say. And that is symbolic of the ladder in all religious depictions. Even if you look at something within alchemy, like Robert Flood's alchemical drawing of the ladder, each step is fundamentally a property. Sensus, imagination, ratio, intellectus, intelligen, and verbum. Or even if you look at Blake's Jacob's Ladder with the helical spiral staircase, which is very symbolic and something I'll talk about probably at another time. Manly P. Hall writes, "The Gnostics held that human nature mirrors the duality found in the world. In part, it was made by the false creator, and in part it consists of the true God. Within the human dwells a divine spark, a spirit that is older than the created world and all in it. Much of the time we are ignorant of the divine spark resident within us. To awaken to the recognition of this presence involves overcoming powerful obstacles which seem to be built into our own nature and into the environment within which we exist. Gnostic wisdom has often alluded to the possibility that these obstacles may in some way be connected with the powers that manage certain aspects of the universe, and whose dominion over us might be threatened by our gnosis. Death releases the divine spark from its lowly prison, but such release may be only temporary unless liberating knowledge has come to the human while still on earth." End quote. So it is a psychological and external battle with your surroundings for attaining gnosis. What holds one down from the qualitative development is the quantitative supremacy, let's say. This is the will that is present at the moment, and that which is forwarding the objectifying nature of degrading material consumer culture, a culture which, within its own continuous desire for consumption, reduces the value of everything because its fundamental premise is not based on maintaining intrinsic value, but reducing something with label product for commercialization. And this is scary because what comes after that? On the globalist, cultural collective level, when you have commercialized the soul of man, you get barbarism, cultural barbarism in relation to the product, the cultic value sucked out because of a form of nihilism within the collective consciousness, which I think Mark Fisher talked about in relation to capitalism, which thus inevitably leads to something like a disbelief, negation, or a sort of person with outside viewer arrogance and perceived superiority, with their deconstructive analysis, which is the human imitation of a machine, deconstruction, reconstruction, the quantitative analytic man. So the moral of the story, I guess, or from my perspective, with all this knowledge on an idea of gnosis and Gnosticism and a demiurge, is that with relation to the global consumerist corporations, which you know are in their thousands, are fundamentally soul eaters, maybe even like psychological emanations of the demiurge. But what would that be? I guess in terms of psychological types, the Gnostics split people into 3 types, and that the heletics, if I've said that right, would be the ones who would project the demiurge into the world through materialistic, earthbound interest. Then on the opposite side of the spiritual scale, you would have the pneumatics, who want spiritual Gnostic liberation, which I guess are the people who watch this video. But then again, I don't like how that is a cemented label. It's kind of like saying that you can't be on a process of enlightenment of some kind, or you cannot have a spiritual epiphany of some kind that will take you out of that psychological framework. I quote, again from Manly P. Hall, "Gnosticism looks upon men and women as gods and goddesses who have forgotten who they are. Humans are caught in a predicament wherein the limitations imposed by physical existence are combined with a triple ignorance. Ignorance of our origins, of our true nature, and of our ultimate destiny. It is from this predicament that the Gnostics aspire to be freed by Gnosis."
Now, one of the most important first principles when it comes to studying psychology and the mastery of the soul is that we are at war with ourselves. There is a difference between our conceptual vision of ourselves that comes out of our head, perhaps our left hemisphere, most notably by Freud, the ego, and of course the unconscious and subconscious and lower conscious passions and urges, and the id, as they might say. To give you some examples of this, say you walk into a bar and you see a very, very pretty lady over in the corner. But of course she is standing around with a load of her friends and she's donning a bitch face, a do not come over and talk to me face, a ugh, I don't want to have any weirdos coming up and interrupting my day. And you will have two main problems. You'll have two urges. And both of these urges become serious problems for you because one of them says you want that. Go over and talk to her. It's your raw desire, your visceral, primal desire. But the thing is that that's scary because she looks intimidating. So you'll have another urge that comes up where it's like, don't get embarrassed and rejected. Don't put yourself in that type of position. Bow away, run away, okay? And this all happens underneath your neck, you know, it's subconscious largely. You don't really think this stuff through and you don't really articulate it to yourself. You just feel all this tension boil up into your body. Some tension which is like a rawr, sort of saying I want it, and the other is like, I'm not sure, I hesitate, be careful. Now what will often happen is these two will fight inside of you, usually below your thinking mind, and one of them will defeat the other, and that will be the consequential decision that you will make, and that will sort of appear in your mind as like an impulse, and then you'll go and do that impulse. And so if you're maybe a little bit of a coward and you're actually afraid of going for what you want, the fear will dominate the desire, and you will then have that fear that shoots up into your head. And what will happen is your head will have a very, very difficult problem. You'll have to make sense of what happened. The same sort of happens with the desire. If that dominates the fear and you push forward, your head will sort of have to be like, oh, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to go and do it anyway. And you walk over and just introduce yourself. Boyo alert. I recommend you say that. That's the pickup line that you want to use. And so your decision appears as this like rush of forwardness towards the experience. It's a you could say a brave approach, if you will, to surrender to this desire and get carried into the chaos. Now, of course, that's kind of flattering. It's like, I'm a brave dude, I feel great and all that type of stuff. So it's not generally that much of a problem. But when the fear dominates the desire and pushes it down, what happens is you have a very, very difficult problem intellectually, because you're now after pushing down something that you want and something that would make you feel brave and cool, which is going for what you want, and you need to explain to yourself why that's okay. You can't necessarily say to yourself, I'm a coward and I'm afraid of the girl, and we never do that. So what we do is we actually rationalize. We make a fake ego defense. The left hemisphere is prone to these delusional rationalizations. Freud noticed the same with the ego. We make these defense mechanisms. And so we might look at the girl and say to ourselves a story that's not true but is useful. We might say, oh, she's probably a bitch. Oh, she's probably materialist. Oh, she's probably not, like, she's probably dumb. She's probably a dumb blonde or something like this. And I'm, you know, a noble, cool guy who's like waiting for a girl who's more my type here in the corner. This type of thing. And what happens there is you have a lie, a comfortable, pretty lie that allows you to feel okay with your cowardice. Now, the division between the head and the body is a massive, massive problem and driving force in all of our lives. And coming to understand this is amazingly revelatory, because quite a lot of human behavior and social behavior is operant from these rationalizations that the ego consciousness often makes, and an unconsciousness and denial of the actual urges that run us underneath. Freud wrote a very bleak book called Civilization and Its Discontents, or something along those lines, that sort of talks about this, basically saying there's huge torrents of super forces living inside, underneath the consciousness of the mobs of people that they're very much unaware of. Now, this is actually quite fascinating, because a nephew of Freud, Edward Bernays, then came along and thought about this, and he was like, awesome, Freud, so let's try sell people stuff based on these urges. And Freud was like, no, man, like, no, I'm not talking about that. And he's like, all right, I got you, Sigmund, cheers, uncle, I'm gonna go do that. And he's like, no, stop. And he's like, cheers, stay back there in Austria or England, wherever you are, I'm going to head over to America, and I'm going to turn it into a consumer society. And so what Bernays realized is that these unconscious urges, if you can talk to them directly, as opposed to the silly rationalizations, if you can get past them and speak to the unconscious urges, you can actually do serious damage. You can make a lot of money this way. So, for example, you might say, if you're Edward Bernays and you saw this dynamic with the guy who is scared of the girl in the bar, he's intimidated, you might realize that the guy needs something that flatters his ego in order to make him feel attractive or something like that. This guy is struggling with this war between desire and fear, and so you might start to try market stuff to him that presents to him a variety of different possibilities that will allow these urges to express themselves. You might sell him, for example, the ultimate cologne that makes all the girls listen to you. Or you might sell them a course on how to pick up girls, how to overcome your approach anxiety. Or you might think about a certain type of dress. Or you might think of a certain pickup line that you offer him in some type of ebook or something like this. You would think about things that serve those urges, and you offer him these objects, and you say to him, take these objects, and these objects will help you fulfill that problem of yours. And of course, because these urges are so prominent and powerful, the guy will latch onto them. His urges will attach to these objects and make him really, really fetishize over them. And his identity will start to get wrapped up into this. A guy who really gets into this stuff, he'll start wearing a certain cologne, he'll start dressing a certain way, he might start reading all about seduction and all this type of stuff, and he'll take on a persona. He'll start to act like this character, and if you take away his cologne and take away his pickup lines and take away all this type of stuff, he panics. He's like, oh no, I've lost my identity. I'm just now a raw human being wrestling with these emotions again. I can't do it. I'm alone. I'm afraid again. But maybe when he has this persona, he feels confident and capable of doing what he wants to do. And Bernays learned this in many different directions. He got women, for example, to smoke by targeting their identity, by attaching smoking with the idea of the feminist will for freedom. The torches of liberty is what he called them. And of course, the identity of a free woman got wrapped up with the object of smoking cigarettes, and he and his buddies made a lot of money. The patriarchy made a lot of money off the feminist wanting to smoke, wanting to be free. The objects were attached to an identity, and the identity attached to these big, powerful forces running inside the body. Now, this is absolutely fascinating in the representation of things like Gnosticism, because, of course, the division between the conscious thinking mind and the felt experience is huge, and the conscious, egotistical, rationalizing mind is often fake, is often a lie, to the point where you can see this in scientific experiments and procedural experiments of the left hemisphere, where it rationalizes, it lies, it is fake. But of course, the lies that it tells us is very, very persuasive and really attaches us to certain things around us. But the direct and well-studied understanding of the felt experience is what is real, is what is the most honest and raw expression of ourselves. And if you were to talk to people, if you were to talk to a people and try to spiritually educate them, psychologically educate them, you have to take this young man maybe and say to him, it's like, look, bro, you're a coward and you're afraid. Now, this would not be a good marketing tool at all, because you would insult him, you would insult his self-image, and he would be less likely to listen to you. But it would be very real and honest, and it would pull him out of his silly conceptual head and get him to get in touch with the real felt experience. Sophia, if you will, the actual reality, the actual dramatic forces that drive everything. And if you pulled him down into that and represented this to him, you might actually have the best chance in helping him, because you're saying, maybe, dude, you need to work on being more courageous more, so you can become the type of guy that believes in yourself in these moments. You can train yourself to overcome fear in all instances. This is actually the old Roman conception of what it meant to be virtuous, to allow courage to dominate, courage to face reality and dominate fear. It's a very, very fascinating thing. So you are sort of in that position when you're dealing with these things. You've got this fake sort of identity and rationalizations that attach and fetishize objects, motivated by these desires that we poorly understand. And the great liberation, the great plugging out of the matrix comes when you go back to the original felt experiences and allow them to drive you. So I'm going to try to keep this brief, because I have a propensity towards ranting, but I will tell Mr. Thoughts on Thinking, thank you very much for having me on again for a chat. I hope you found all this stuff juicy, boyos, and stay well, have fun, bye bye.